Have you ever wondered what depths of human depravity lie hidden in the shadows of our nation's history? What horrors were committed in plain sight, documented in yellowed papers and courthouse records, yet somehow erased from our collective memory? Tonight, we uncover one such nightmare from the American South that will make you question how well you truly know your own hometown's past. Before we continue with this disturbing historical account, please comment below where you're watching from. We need your support to keep uncovering these hidden historical horrors. Subscribe now and help us bring these forgotten atrocities to light. In the rolling hills of Boone County, Kentucky, spring of 1855 arrived with unusual warmth, turning the landscape into a canvas of vibrant greens and colorful blooms. But beneath this picturesque scenery, a darkness festered at Willow Creek Plantation, owned by Judge Thaddeus Blackwood, one of the wealthiest men in the state. The Blackwood family had built their fortune over 3 generations, expanding their holdings to over 2,000 acres of prime Kentucky soil. The plantation primarily produced tobacco and hemp, requiring substantial labor that was provided by nearly 150 enslaved individuals. Judge Blackwood, a respected figure who presided over the county court, maintained a carefully cultivated public image of stern but fair Christian decency. Catherine Miller, a junior clerk at the Boone County Records Office, discovered the first indication of something sinister while reorganizing files from the 1850s. She found a leather-bound ledger with the Blackwood family crest embossed on its cover. Initially assuming it was merely another property record, she opened it to catalog its contents properly. "I remember feeling physically ill when I realized what I was reading," she would later write in her journal. The ledger contained detailed records of what Judge Blackwood called marriage auctions. The coldness with which human beings were paired and sold like livestock made me rush to the washroom to empty my stomach. The ledger, dated from January 1853 to November 1857, contained meticulous records of a practice that went beyond even the accepted horrors of slavery in the antebellum South. Judge Blackwood had developed a system of pairing enslaved men and women together as marriage lots to be sold as a unit to neighboring plantations or to his business associates. Historian Dr. Marcus Hendricks from the University of Louisville explains, "What made Blackwood's practice particularly disturbing was the calculated nature of it. These weren't random pairings. The ledger shows he selected individuals based on physical attributes, creating what he considered optimal breeding pairs to maximize future profit. The ledger contained precise descriptions of each person's physical characteristics, work capacity, and temperament, followed by notations about their supposed reproductive potential. Even more disturbing were Blackwood's personal notes in the margins, evaluating previous pairings based on the number and quality of children produced. From a historical perspective, this provides rare documentary evidence of how enslaved people's reproduction was commodified," Dr. Hendricks continues. But from a human perspective, it's simply horrific to see lives reduced to breeding potential and dollar values. One particular entry from March 18th, 1855, stands out for its calculated cruelty. Lot 23, Isaiah, age 28, field hand, exceptional strength, no rebellious tendencies. And Esther, age 22, house servant, excellent health, 2 successful births. Starting bid, $1,800. Notes: pair previously resistant to matching but have shown compliance following disciplinary measures, expected to produce valuable offspring within 1 year. What made this entry especially chilling was the addendum added later in Blackwood's handwriting: sold to Henderson Plantation for $2,100. Isaiah attempted escape night before transfer, applied 30 lashes and removed 3 toes from left foot as preventative measure. Delivery completed as scheduled. When Catherine Miller brought the ledger to her supervisor, Franklin Pierce Davidson, she expected immediate action. Instead, she was told to return the book to storage and forget about it. "Some history is better left buried, Miss Miller," Davidson reportedly told her. "The Blackwood descendants are still prominent citizens in this county. No good can come from stirring up ancient troubles." But Catherine couldn't forget what she had seen. Working after hours, she began to cross-reference the names in the ledger with other county records, building a comprehensive picture of Blackwood's operation. Her research revealed something even more disturbing. The marriage auctions were not merely private business transactions, but social events attended by the county's elite. From the diary of Elizabeth Cavendish, wife of a local physician, dated April 22, 1855. "Attended Judge Blackwood's spring gathering today. After dinner and music in the garden, the gentleman retired to the south barn for the auction. Though ladies are not permitted to attend that portion of the event, Judge Blackwood has made it quite the social occasion. While the men conduct their business, we ladies were entertained by his daughter's piano recital. I find these spring gatherings increasingly uncomfortable, though I dare not refuse the invitation." The screams from the barn were quite audible during the quiet passages of the music, and Mrs. Blackwood pretended not to notice how her daughter's hands trembled on the keys. This entry suggests the auctions were accompanied by physical punishment or demonstrations of the enslaved people's temperaments, conducted within earshot of the main house. It also indicates that while some guests may have been disturbed by the practice, social pressure prevented any objections. Further investigation by Catherine revealed that Judge Blackwood had developed a reputation throughout Kentucky and neighboring states for providing quality-matched pairs. His system was apparently viewed as innovative by other plantation owners, who began to implement similar practices. A letter from William Forsyth of Lexington to Judge Blackwood, dated June 10, 1855. "My dear Judge, I must commend you on the excellent pair acquired at your May auction. They have already been settled in their cabin and appear to understand what is expected of them. Your suggestion regarding the incentive system has been implemented. Additional food rations to be provided upon confirmation of pregnancy. I believe this will yield the results we both anticipate. I look forward to attending your autumn event. Perhaps you might set aside the young woman we discussed. Her features would introduce some desirable characteristics to my household staff. With highest regards, W.F." The casual tone of this correspondence reveals how normalized this brutal practice had become among the wealthy plantation class. What had started as Blackwood's personal system had spread to become a regional practice. Catherine's research took an even darker turn when she discovered court records indicating that Judge Blackwood had used his position on the bench to legitimize his auction system. In several cases where enslaved people had been inherited by widows or minor children, Blackwood ruled that the most profitable use of these human assets was to enter them into his matching system, effectively funneling more people into his auctions. From court transcripts dated September 3, 1855, in the matter of the estate of Jonathan Wilkes, deceased, the court finds that the 4 slaves in question represent the only significant assets of the estate. As Mrs. Wilkes has expressed her inability to manage plantation labor, this court determines that the interests of the widow and minor children are best served by liquidating these assets through the established county auction system. The court will serve as executor in this matter to ensure fair market value is obtained. What the transcript doesn't explicitly state is that the established county auction system was Blackwood's own creation, and that he personally profited from each sale by taking a substantial commission. As Catherine delved deeper into the records, she began to piece together the fates of the people sold through Blackwood's system. Many were transported to plantations in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana, effectively disappearing from Kentucky records. However, she found evidence that at least 3 dozen marriage pairs remained within Boone County and neighboring areas. Her most significant discovery came in the form of a medical examiner's report from November 1855, detailing the death of an enslaved woman named Ruth, who had been paired and sold through Blackwood's auction earlier that year. Examination of the deceased reveals extensive bruising consistent with repeated physical trauma. Subject, approximately 24 years of age, shows evidence of recent childbirth. Cause of death determined to be internal bleeding. Owner reports subject attempted to terminate pregnancy on multiple occasions and exhibited consistent resistance to fulfilling her intended purpose. No criminal action recommended as the property loss is sufficiently punitive to the owner. The clinical language of the report barely conceals the horrific reality. A young woman forced into a marriage arrangement had repeatedly tried to resist bearing children in captivity, eventually dying from either complications of childbirth or abuse. Most disturbing was the lack of any legal consequence for her death, with the financial loss to her owner considered punishment enough. Catherine's research came to an abrupt halt in December 1855, when her supervisor discovered her unauthorized investigation. She was immediately dismissed from her position at the county records office. 3 days later, her rented room was found empty, with most of her belongings still in place. A hastily scrawled note on her desk read only, "They know what I found." Local authorities conducted a cursory investigation into her disappearance, concluding that she had likely left town voluntarily after losing her employment. The case was closed within a week, and Catherine Miller was never seen in Boone County again. The story might have ended there, buried along with countless other atrocities of the era, if not for a discovery made in 1973 during the renovation of an old post office building in Madison, Indiana, just across the Ohio River from Kentucky. Workers, removing a section of wall, found a small metal box containing several documents, including a letter signed by Catherine Miller. The letter, dated January 2nd, 1856, was addressed to the editor of The Liberator, a well-known abolitionist newspaper published in Boston. "Sir, I write to you in grave danger, having fled my home after discovering evidence of unspeakable crimes. Judge Thaddeus Blackwood of Boone County, Kentucky, has established what he calls a marriage auction system, wherein enslaved persons are forcibly paired and sold together for the explicit purpose of producing children for profit. I have documented his operation in detail and am including copies of several key records. Most disturbing is the social acceptance of this practice among Kentucky's highest circles and the use of judicial power to expand this evil system. I beg you to publish this information, though I fear I may not live to see it in print. I am being pursued by men I believe were sent by Judge Blackwood. Should you not hear from me again, please know that everything contained herein is true and can be verified through the county records if they have not been destroyed. In God's name, let the world know what horrors are being committed here. Catherine Miller." Accompanying the letter were several pages of copied entries from Blackwood's ledger, along with notes Catherine had made connecting various county officials to the auction system. However, there is no evidence that these documents ever reached The Liberator or any other abolitionist publication. The editor's records from that period contain no mention of Catherine Miller or her explosive allegations. Historians have since confirmed many details of Catherine's account through surviving county records, though the original ledger she discovered has never been found. What is known is that Judge Blackwood continued to preside over the county court until 1858, when he retired due to failing health. He died in 1861, just as the Civil War was beginning. The Blackwood family maintained their prominent position in Kentucky society well into the 20th century. The Plantation House still stands today as a historic landmark, though tour guides make no mention of the atrocities committed there. The official history describes Judge Blackwood simply as a prosperous plantation owner and respected jurist. In 2005, Dr. Eliza Johnson, a descendant of an enslaved family from Boone County, began researching her family history. Through DNA testing and painstaking genealogical work, she discovered that her great-great-grandparents had been paired through Blackwood's auction system. Learning how my ancestors were forced together like animals was devastating, Dr. Johnson said in a recent interview. But what's almost worse is how successfully this history was erased. How many other families like mine don't know the truth of their origins because these stories were deliberately buried? Dr. Johnson has petitioned the Kentucky Historical Society to amend the historical markers at the former Blackwood Plantation to acknowledge the atrocities committed there. So far, her efforts have met with resistance from both the Historical Society and the current property owners, who operate the estate as a wedding venue and tourist attraction. They're literally hosting weddings on ground where people were forced into the most perverse mockery of marriage imaginable. Dr. Johnson notes, the irony would be laughable if it weren't so deeply painful. As for Catherine Miller, her fate remains unknown. The letter found in Madison, Indiana suggests she fled north, possibly attempting to reach abolitionist circles in Boston. No record of her has been found after January 1856. Some researchers believe she may have changed her name to avoid Blackwood's pursuers. Others fear a darker end to her story. In 1997, during the construction of a highway extension near the Ohio River, workers uncovered human remains in an unmarked grave. Forensic examination determined they belonged to a Caucasian female, approximately 25 to 30 years of age, who died sometime in the mid-19th century. The cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. Among the few personal effects found with the body was a small brass key that matched the description of keys used for county record office filing cabinets from that era. Though the remains could not be positively identified, many historians believe they may belong to Catherine Miller, silenced before she could expose the full extent of Blackwood's crimes. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this story is how effectively it was suppressed. Without Catherine's hidden letter and the scattered records that survived the selective purging of county archives, we might never have known about Judge Blackwood's marriage auctions. This raises an unsettling question. How many other atrocities lie hidden in our history, protected by the powerful families who committed them? The story of Willow Creek Plantation isn't just about horrors committed in the past. It's about the active suppression of truth that continues to this day. The descendants of those who suffered under Blackwood's system still live in Kentucky and across America, many unaware of their families' painful origins. In 2017, an anonymous donor provided funding for a more thorough investigation of the remaining Blackwood records. Researchers from the University of Louisville uncovered evidence suggesting the marriage auction system may have been more widespread than previously thought, with similar practices documented in at least 5 other Kentucky counties during the same period. Most chilling was the discovery of a letter from 1857, indicating that Judge Blackwood had begun keeping detailed records of the children born to pairs he had sold, tracking their development with an eye toward future matches he might arrange once they reached adulthood. This suggests he envisioned his system continuing indefinitely, creating a controlled breeding program spanning generations. The Civil War interrupted these plans, but one must wonder, without that historical intervention, how far would this atrocity have spread? And given how effectively this history was concealed, what other systems of exploitation and abuse might have continued undetected, perhaps in different forms, long after slavery was officially abolished? Local legend in Boone County holds that the grounds of the former Willow Creek Plantation are haunted. Visitors and staff at the estate have reported hearing whispers in empty rooms, particularly in the renovated barn where the auctions were likely held. Some claim to have seen the figure of a woman in 19th-century dress searching through papers in the main house's study, only to vanish when approached. Whether or not one believes in such supernatural manifestations, there is something undeniably haunting about standing on ground where such calculated cruelty was practiced. The ghosts of Willow Creek Plantation may be metaphorical, but they continue to influence our present in very real ways. The story of Judge Blackwood's marriage lots reminds us that history is not simply a collection of facts from the past. It is an ongoing battleground where truth struggles against powerful interests who prefer certain stories remain untold. As we continue to uncover these hidden histories, we must ask ourselves, what other horrors lie buried just beneath the surface of our national narrative, waiting to be exposed? More disturbing still is the realization that many of the systems designed to protect wealth and power remain intact today. The same legal mechanisms that allowed Judge Blackwood to use his judicial position to expand his horrific auction system still exist in various forms, allowing the powerful to shape not only our present, but our understanding of our past. As night falls over the rolling hills of Boone County, the beautifully restored Willow Creek Plantation glows with warm light, welcoming visitors with southern hospitality and carefully curated historical displays. But beneath the manicured gardens and behind the smiling tour guides lies a darkness that has never truly been exorcised. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirit of Catherine Miller still searches for justice, for acknowledgement of the truth she gave her life to reveal. Her courage stands as a testament to the fact that even in the darkest times, there are those who will risk everything to stand against evil. Yet her tragic fate, her story nearly lost, her warnings unheeded, her body likely dumped in an unmarked grave, serves as a reminder of how easily truth can be silenced when it threatens those with power. One wonders how many other Catherine Millers have been erased from our history, their discoveries buried along with them. The search for the complete truth about Judge Blackwood's marriage auctions continues to this day. Researchers and descendants of the affected families work tirelessly to piece together the fragments of this deliberately shattered history. But many records remain sealed or have been destroyed, and the full extent of the atrocities committed at Willow Creek Plantation may never be known. What is certain is that the consequences of Blackwood's system echo through generations. Families were created through force and calculation, their descendants now scattered across America, many unaware of the traumatic origins of their bloodlines. The psychological impact of such beginnings cannot be measured, but surely continues to reverberate through time in ways both seen and unseen. In recent years, some descendants of the enslaved people of Willow Creek have formed a community organization dedicated to reclaiming this history and seeking acknowledgement and restitution. They call themselves Catherine's Witnesses, in honor of the young clerk who first tried to bring these crimes to light. Their work faces constant resistance from institutions and families who prefer to maintain a more comfortable version of history. Museum exhibits about the plantation era in Kentucky rarely mention the calculated breeding practices documented in Blackwood's records. School textbooks gloss over these specific horrors if they mention slavery in the state at all. This sanitization of history serves a purpose. It allows us to distance ourselves from the past, to pretend that such evils were anomalies rather than systems deliberately designed and maintained by respected members of society. It allows the descendants of men like Judge Blackwood to dissociate their family legacies from the atrocities that built their fortunes. But the truth has a persistence that defies even the most determined efforts to suppress it. It survives in fragments of documents, in family stories passed down through generations, in the genetic connections that link the descendants of those who suffered under Blackwood's system. Like water wearing away stone, truth gradually erodes the barriers built to contain it. In 2020, a graduate student researching judicial corruption in 19th century Kentucky discovered a series of letters between Judge Blackwood and several state legislators, revealing that his marriage auction system had received tacit legal protection through specially crafted statutes. These laws, ostensibly designed to protect the integrity of slave property transfers, effectively shielded Blackwood and those who adopted his methods from any legal scrutiny. More disturbing still was evidence that after Catherine Miller's disappearance, a systematic purge of county records took place, with dozens of documents related to the auctions removed and presumably destroyed. This was not merely a cover-up after the fact, but an organized effort to ensure that future generations would never know the full truth. Yet despite these efforts, pieces of the story survived. A diary entry here, a court record there, a letter hidden in a wall, each fragment adding to our understanding of what transpired at Willow Creek Plantation. Like a mosaic assembled from shattered pieces, the picture remains incomplete, but becomes more clear with each new discovery. Perhaps most chilling are the architectural plans for the Blackwood estate discovered in 2021, showing that beneath the main barn where the auctions took place was a series of small windowless rooms described in the documents as conditioning chambers. Excavations of the site have been blocked by the current property owners, leaving researchers to speculate about the purpose of these spaces. Some historians believe these rooms were used to prepare enslaved people who resisted being paired, subjecting them to isolation, deprivation, and other forms of psychological manipulation until they became compliant. If true, this would indicate an even more sophisticated system of torture and coercion than previously understood. Today, visitors to Boone County can drive past the former Willow Creek Plantation and admire its antebellum elegance without any indication of the horrors that occurred there. The roadside historical marker mentions only that it was the home of prominent jurist Thaddeus Blackwood, known for his contributions to Kentucky's legal system. This erasure is not accidental. It is the final stage of atrocity, denial. First comes the crime itself, then the cover-up, then the silencing of witnesses, and finally the rewriting of history to exclude the event entirely. This pattern has repeated countless times throughout human history, allowing the powerful to commit unspeakable acts without facing judgment, even from history itself. But as long as there are those willing to dig for the truth, to piece together the fragments, to listen to the whispers that persist despite all efforts to silence them, no atrocity can remain completely hidden. The story of Judge Blackwood's marriage auctions continues to emerge from the shadows, despite a century and a half of deliberate suppression. As you read this account, you become part of this process of recovery and witness. You now carry a piece of this history, this truth that some would prefer remained buried. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you help bring it into the light, or will you allow it to sink back into darkness? The choice, as always, belongs to each of us. But remember, the ghosts of Willow Creek Plantation, both literal and metaphorical, continue to walk among us, waiting for justice that has been too long denied. Turn to God and Jesus Christ for guidance in these dark times, for only through divine wisdom can we face the horrors of our shared past and find a path toward healing and reconciliation. In the summer of 2022, Rachel Henderson, a doctoral student at the University of Kentucky, received a strange email from an anonymous sender. The message contained only a set of GPS coordinates and the words, "Dig deeper." Intrigued but skeptical, Rachel decided to investigate, driving out to the location, a remote area of woodland about 3 miles from the former Willow Creek Plantation. Following the coordinates to a small clearing, Rachel noticed signs of recently disturbed earth. Acting on academic curiosity rather than common sense, she began to dig and soon uncovered a rusted metal box. Inside was a water-damaged journal, its pages fragile and discolored with age. The name written on the inside cover sent a chill down her spine. Property of Catherine Miller. I couldn't believe what I was holding, Rachel would later recall. Catherine Miller is almost a mythological figure in Kentucky historical research. The woman who disappeared after allegedly discovering Judge Blackwood's marriage auction records. Finding her journal was like a paleontologist discovering a dinosaur everyone thought was just a legend. The journal was in fragile condition, with many pages damaged beyond recovery, but the entries that remained legible provided a disturbing first-hand account of Catherine's investigation and her final days in Boone County. More significantly, it contained information that had never been discovered in the official records. From Catherine's journal, dated October 15, 1855. Today I found something worse than the auctions themselves. Hidden in a separate ledger, marked only with the Greek letter omega, are records of what the judge calls his special projects. He's been selecting certain children born from his arranged pairs, those showing specific traits he considers valuable, and reclaiming them from their owners once they reach age 12 or 13. The documentation is coded, but I've managed to determine that at least 17 children have been brought back to Willow Creek under this program. What happens to them afterward is unclear, but there are references to a northern facility where they are sent. I cannot imagine what purpose this serves, but given everything else I've uncovered, I fear the worst. These children simply disappear from all records after leaving Willow Creek. No sale documents, no death certificates, nothing. This entry suggests that Blackwood's horrific system extended beyond simple profit motives into something more akin to human experimentation or selective breeding on a multi-generational scale. Even more disturbing is that this aspect of his operation apparently continued after the matched pairs were sold to other plantations, with Blackwood maintaining a claim on certain offspring. Another entry, dated November 2nd, 1855. I have made contact with Samuel Winters from the Cincinnati Abolition Society. He has agreed to help me document everything and take my evidence north. We are to meet 3 nights from now at the Millers Creek Bridge. I dare not write more, but if all goes well, Blackwood's crimes will soon be exposed to the world. I pray for the safety of those still suffering under his system and for justice to finally reach Willow Creek. The next entry, dated November 6th, is written in a shaky, urgent hand. Betrayed. Winters was working for Blackwood all along. They were waiting at the bridge. I barely escaped with my life and this journal. 3 men are hunting me now. I overheard them say, "The judge wants me alive to make an example of me at the next auction. God help me, I know what that means. I'm heading for Madison, hoping to cross the river before they catch my trail. If I survive, I will try to reach the real abolitionists in Boston. If not, may someone find this journal and continue what I started." This was the final entry in Catherine's journal. The fact that it was buried in woodland miles from the plantation suggests she may have hidden it while fleeing her pursuers, perhaps intending to retrieve it later if she escaped. The condition and location of the journal raised troubling questions about Catherine's fate. If these were indeed her last written words, they paint a far more sinister picture of her disappearance than the official account of her simply leaving town after losing her job. Rachel Henderson's discovery prompted a renewed investigation into the Blackwood case, focusing particularly on Catherine's claim about the special projects and the northern facility. Researchers began searching through property records in states north of Kentucky, looking for any holdings connected to Judge Blackwood or his associates. In December 2022, they found something. A deed for a large property in southern Ohio, purchased in 1849 by a company called Omega Agricultural Research, with Thaddeus Blackwood listed as the primary shareholder. The property, comprising over 500 acres of isolated farmland, was described as an experimental station for the development of advanced agricultural methods. Local historical records indicated that the facility operated until 1862, when it was abandoned at the height of the Civil War. The property was sold in 1870 to a timber company, which cleared much of the land before it was eventually converted into a state forest reserve in the early 20th century. Today, nothing remains of the original structures except for stone foundations hidden among second-growth forest. With permission from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, an archaeological team from the University of Kentucky conducted a preliminary survey of the site in spring 2023. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the academic community and beyond. The foundations revealed a complex of buildings much larger than would be needed for agricultural research. More disturbing were the artifacts recovered: medical instruments, restraints, and specialized equipment whose purpose could not immediately be determined. Most chilling was the discovery of a small cemetery at the edge of the property, containing the remains of at least 37 individuals, most estimated to be between 13 and 20 years of age at time of death. Dr. Marcus Hendricks, who led the archaeological investigation, describes their findings. This was no agricultural research station. The layout and equipment we've uncovered are consistent with what we might call a 19th century eugenics facility. The medical instruments suggest surgical interventions. The restraints tell us these procedures were not voluntary. And the cemetery tells us they were often fatal. Forensic analysis of the remains revealed evidence of surgical procedures performed on many of the deceased, including cranial operations consistent with early, crude attempts at brain surgery. DNA testing is ongoing, but preliminary results have confirmed familial connections to descendants of enslaved people from Willow Creek and other Kentucky plantations known to have participated in Blackwood's auction system. These discoveries suggest that Catherine Miller had uncovered only the surface of Blackwood's operations. The special projects she mentioned appear to have been an early, horrifically unethical attempt at selective breeding combined with medical experimentation, conducted on young people born from the forced marriages he arranged. The purpose of these experiments remains unclear, though some historians have suggested connections to the early American eugenics movement, which sought to improve humanity through controlled breeding, a pseudoscience that would later inspire some of the worst atrocities of the 20th century. Dr. Eliza Johnson, herself a descendant of enslaved people from Willow Creek, has been working with the research team to piece together the full story. What we're uncovering here goes beyond even the horrors of slavery as we've understood it. This was a calculated attempt to treat human beings as literal breeding stock, to control their reproduction across generations, and ultimately to experiment on the children produced from these forced unions. It represents a level of systematic dehumanization that is difficult to comprehend. As news of these discoveries spread, other researchers began coming forward with similar findings from other states. In Virginia, Tennessee, and Louisiana, evidence has emerged of plantation owners implementing systems similar to Blackwood's marriage auctions during the same period. Some records explicitly reference the Blackwood method or Kentucky system, suggesting that his approach was being adopted as a model by others. Most disturbing is evidence that some aspects of this system may have continued in modified form even after emancipation. Records from the post-Civil War era show that several former plantation owners, including associates of Judge Blackwood, established medical research facilities that disproportionately employed or treated former slaves and their descendants. From the Journal of Dr. William Harrison, a physician associated with one such facility in Tennessee, dated 1871. The work begun at Willow Creek continues, though under necessary disguise. The subjects no longer come to us through the auction system, but poverty and illness serve nearly as well to bring them to our door. Most are descendants of the original paired bloodlines, allowing us to continue tracking the inherited characteristics across generations. Judge Blackwood's vision extends beyond his lifetime, as he always intended. This suggests that even after the formal end of slavery, the human experimentation begun under Blackwood's system continued, targeting vulnerable populations and particularly focusing on the descendants of those who had been part of his original breeding program. Further evidence comes from census records showing unusual population patterns in certain counties where Blackwood and his associates had operated. In the decades following the Civil War, there are documented cases of entire communities of former slaves and their descendants disappearing from the records, with no indication of where they relocated. Local newspapers occasionally reported on outbreaks of disease in these communities, requiring quarantine measures overseen by private medical organizations, some with documented connections to former plantation owners. These reports were typically brief and vague about the nature of the illnesses or the fate of those affected. In 1915, a journalist named Frederick Douglass Williams, no relation to the famous abolitionist, began investigating these population anomalies for the Chicago Defender, a prominent African-American newspaper. His research took him to several small communities in Kentucky and neighboring states, where he interviewed elderly residents who remembered the post-war period. From Williams's notes, found decades later in the newspaper's archives, Mrs. Harriet Jackson, age 87, recalls that when she was a girl in Mason County, men in suits would come through their community every few years, claiming to be doctors offering free medical care. They would examine all the children, taking particular interest in certain families known to have connections to Willow Creek Plantation. They'd take measurements of the children's heads and bodies, she told me, write everything down in their books. Then they'd tell some folks their children needed special treatment for diseases they might develop later. Some of those children went away for this treatment and never came back. Mothers who asked too many questions sometimes disappeared too. Williams' investigation was never published. According to internal records at the Chicago Defender, he traveled to Boone County in April 1916 to follow a lead about medical records supposedly stored at a former Blackwood property. He telegraphed his editor that he had made a significant discovery and would return to Chicago within the week. He was never heard from again. Local authorities conducted a brief investigation, concluding that Williams had likely moved on to another location without informing his employer. His personal effects, including his notes and camera, were never recovered. The editor of the Defender attempted to continue the investigation, but found that sources who had previously spoken to Williams now refused to talk, claiming they had never met him. This pattern of disappearances, Catherine Miller, Frederick Douglass Williams, and others who attempted to investigate the Blackwood system, suggests an organized effort to suppress the truth that continued long after Judge Blackwood's death in 1861. Such an operation would have required resources, influence, and coordination across multiple states and decades. In recent years, researchers have begun examining the financial records of the Blackwood family and their associates, tracking the flow of money from the antebellum period through the early 20th century. What they've found suggests that the profits from the marriage auction system and whatever occurred at the Ohio facility were reinvested in a network of companies and institutions that continued to benefit from the exploitation begun under slavery. The Blackwood family fortune, initially built on plantation agriculture, diversified after the Civil War into banking, insurance, and, notably, pharmaceutical development. Blackwood Laboratories, founded in 1873 by the judge's son Theodore Blackwood, became a significant producer of medications and tonics in the late 19th century. Patent applications filed by the company make frequent reference to proprietary research conducted over multiple generations. suggesting that the company's products may have been developed using data or even biological materials obtained through the experimentation at the Ohio facility and its successors. Most of these connections remained hidden for over a century, protected by corporate restructuring, name changes, and the deliberate destruction of records. The full extent of the system's reach may never be known, but what has been uncovered raises disturbing questions about how the wealth and knowledge generated through these atrocities continues to influence our society today. Dr. Eliza Johnson explains, "When we talk about the legacy of slavery, we often focus on the obvious injustices, the theft of labor, the denial of freedom and dignity. But what we're uncovering with the Blackwood case shows that the tentacles of this system reached much further and in more insidious ways than most Americans realize. The exploitation didn't end with emancipation, it just evolved into new forms." In 2024, the National Institute of Health announced an investigation into several major pharmaceutical patents from the early 20th century, based on evidence that they may have been developed using data obtained from unethical experimentation on descendants of enslaved people. Some of these patents form the basis for medications still in use today, raising complex questions about scientific ethics and reparative justice. Meanwhile, the archaeological work at the Ohio facility continues, with researchers carefully documenting every aspect of the site to preserve evidence of what occurred there. The human remains discovered in the cemetery have been treated with dignity and respect, with plans for proper reburial after all necessary forensic work is completed. DNA analysis has already connected some of the deceased to living descendants, many of whom had no idea about this aspect of their family history. For these families, the discoveries bring a complex mix of emotions: grief for the suffering of their ancestors, anger at the systems that allowed such atrocities, but also a sense of connection to relatives whose existence had been deliberately erased from history. Tamara Washington, who learned that her great-great-grandfather may have been one of the young people taken to the Ohio facility, describes the impact of this discovery. "It's like finding a missing piece of yourself that you didn't even know was missing. My family always had gaps in our history, stories that didn't quite connect. Now I understand why. Someone tried to write us out of existence, to use us and then erase us. But they failed. I'm still here. We're all still here." For the current residents of Boone County, these revelations have forced a painful reckoning with local history. The Willow Creek Plantation, long celebrated as a historical treasure, has become a source of controversy. Tour operations have been temporarily suspended as discussions continue about how to acknowledge the atrocities that occurred there. Some community members have called for the site to be repurposed as an educational center focused on the true history of slavery in Kentucky, including the specific horrors of Blackwood's system. Others prefer to distance themselves from this history, arguing that focusing on such atrocities only reopens old wounds. What cannot be denied is that the story of Judge Thaddeus Blackwood's marriage auctions and the systems that grew from them is far from a relic of the distant past. Its effects continue to reverberate through families, communities, institutions, and corporations to this day. The discovery of Catherine Miller's journal has vindicated her efforts nearly 170 years after she disappeared while trying to expose the truth. In many ways, she is still accomplishing what she set out to do, bringing light to a darkness that powerful interests tried desperately to keep hidden. Yet, for all that has been uncovered, many questions remain. The full extent of Blackwood's operation may never be known. The total number of people affected, those forced into marriage lots, their children selected for experimentation, and the later generations who continued to be targeted after emancipation, cannot be calculated with certainty. What is clear is that this was not merely a case of individual cruelty, but a systematic effort to exploit human beings in the most intimate and fundamental ways. controlling not just their labor, but their reproduction, their families, and even their bodies after death. It represents a level of calculated dehumanization that challenges our understanding of history and forces us to reconsider narratives about the past that comfort rather than confront. As archaeological work at the Ohio facility continued through 2024, researchers made an unexpected discovery that added a new dimension to the already disturbing story. Beneath the main building's foundation, they uncovered a sealed chamber containing dozens of glass jars, each holding preserved human tissue samples. Each jar was meticulously labeled with a number corresponding to entries in a leather-bound ledger found nearby. The ledger contained detailed notes on the subjects from whom the samples were taken, including their physical characteristics, lineage, often tracing back to specific marriage pairs from Willow Creek, and observations about their performance in various tests and procedures. Most disturbing were entries indicating that some subjects had been deliberately infected with various diseases to study their responses and potential immunity. Other entries documented surgical modifications and their effects on physical and cognitive functions. The clinical language used cannot disguise the horrific reality. Human beings were being treated as laboratory specimens. Dr. Hendricks describes the significance of this discovery. What we're seeing here goes beyond even the worst expectations we had based on earlier findings. This wasn't just selective breeding or rudimentary experimentation. This was a sophisticated research operation employing the latest scientific methods of the time. The preservation techniques used for these samples were cutting edge for the mid-19th century. Someone with advanced medical training was involved. Further investigation revealed that Theodore Blackwood, the judge's eldest son, had studied medicine at Harvard before returning to Kentucky in the early 1850s. His name appears frequently in the research notes, suggesting he may have been the primary architect of the experimental aspects of his father's system. References in the notes to the European method indicate possible connections to similar research being conducted in France and Germany during this period, raising the disturbing possibility that the Blackwood operation was part of a larger international network of unethical human experimentation predating the more well-known atrocities of the 20th century. In January 2025, researchers made another breakthrough when they discovered a hidden compartment in Catherine Miller's journal containing several folded pages that had been protected from water damage. These pages included detailed maps of both Willow Creek Plantation and the Ohio facility, with areas marked in code that Catherine had apparently managed to decipher. The most significant of these markings indicated an area beneath the main house at Willow Creek, labeled simply the Archive. Based on this information, researchers petitioned for permission to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys of the Plantation House, now a privately owned historical site. After months of legal battles with the current owners, the survey was finally conducted in May 2025. The results confirmed Catherine's information. Beneath the house was a large, sealed chamber that did not appear in any architectural plans for the property. With court approval, a small team of archaeologists carefully excavated an entrance to the chamber in June. What they found inside was, in the words of team leader Dr. Sophia Chen, the smoking gun that connects all the pieces of this horrific puzzle. The chamber contained hundreds of document boxes, preserved in the cool, dry, underground environment. These records provided a comprehensive overview of Blackwood's entire operation, from the initial marriage auctions through the experiments at the Ohio facility and beyond. Most significantly, they included detailed genealogical charts tracking the descendants of the original paired individuals for multiple generations, with annotations about desired traits that had been successfully cultivated and undesirable characteristics that had been bred out. The documents revealed that by the time of his death in 1861, Judge Blackwood had developed a network of associates across 7 states who were implementing variations of his system. His son Theodore continued to coordinate this network after the judge's death, adapting their methods to operate within the constraints of post-emancipation society. A letter from Theodore Blackwood to an associate in Virginia, dated 1867, outlines this transition. While the legal framework that facilitated our work has been dismantled, the fundamental principles remain sound. The subjects are now technically free, but economic necessity will drive them to us nonetheless. We no longer purchase them at auction. Instead, we offer employment, housing, and medical care, all of which serve our purposes equally well. The careful records maintained by my father allow us to identify and recruit descendants of our most promising bloodlines. They come to us willingly, unaware of their place in the larger design. Those who prove most valuable to our research can be retained indefinitely under various pretexts. The war has set us back, but it has not defeated us. Indeed, in some ways, it has provided new opportunities. Government officials are eager to demonstrate their concern for the former slaves' welfare. They ask few questions about our charitable institutions and medical programs designed to serve these communities. This letter and others like it suggest that after the Civil War, Blackwood's system evolved into a network of seemingly benevolent institutions that continued to target the same populations for exploitation and experimentation, now under the guise of providing aid and employment to formerly enslaved people. Further documents indicate connections between this network and the early American eugenics movement, which gained prominence in the late 19th century. Theodore Blackwood appears to have shared his research findings with prominent eugenicists, contributing to pseudoscientific theories about race and heredity that would later be used to justify discriminatory policies across the United States and beyond. Perhaps most disturbing are indications that some aspects of this system persisted well into the 20th century. Records show that as late as 1932, organizations with documented links to the Blackwood network were still tracking descendants of the original marriage pairs and recruiting them for health studies that may have been continuations of the earlier experimentation. The discovery of the archive has prompted calls for a comprehensive investigation into how the effects of Blackwood's system may still be influencing institutions and populations today. Researchers are working to identify companies, medical institutions, and research data that may have roots in this operation. For the descendants of those affected, these revelations bring both pain and a sense of validation. Many families have carried generations of trauma, health issues, and fractured histories without understanding their origins. Now, some of those mysteries are being solved, though the answers are far from comforting. Michelle Davis, who traced her family line back to a couple paired through Blackwood's auction in 1854, expresses the complex emotions these discoveries have stirred. Finding out that my great-great-grandparents were forced together as part of a breeding experiment is horrifying. But it also helps explain why my grandmother always said our family was being watched. She told stories about men in suits coming to their neighborhood when she was a child, asking questions about who was related to whom, offering free medical exams to certain families. We thought these were just paranoid fantasies from a woman who'd experienced too much racism in her life. Now I wonder what they did to her, what they might have done to all of us. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond the personal trauma of affected families. They challenge fundamental narratives about American history, medicine, and science. They raise questions about the origins of wealth, knowledge, and power that continue to shape our society. Most significantly, they force us to consider how systems of exploitation can evolve and adapt rather than simply ending. The formal institution of slavery was abolished, but the mentalities, networks, and goals that drove Blackwood's operation found new expressions that continued to target the same vulnerable populations. As researchers, descendants, and community members work to process these revelations and determine appropriate responses, one thing becomes clear: the story of Willow Creek Plantation cannot be confined to the past. It is not merely history, but a living legacy that continues to unfold in the present, affecting real people and communities today. In July 2025, a coalition of descendants filed a class action lawsuit against several major corporations with documented connections to the Blackwood network, seeking acknowledgement, apology, and reparations for the generational harm caused by these systems of exploitation. The case remains in its early stages, but it represents an attempt to achieve some measure of justice for atrocities that have gone unaddressed for over a century and a half. Meanwhile, efforts continue to identify and honor the victims of Blackwood's system. The remains found at the Ohio facility will be reinterred in a memorial cemetery, with ceremonies reflecting the diverse religious and cultural traditions of the descendants. Names are being restored to those who were reduced to numbers in the experimental records, returning to them a measure of the humanity that was so brutally denied. For Catherine Miller, whose courage and sacrifice made these discoveries possible, plans are underway for a permanent memorial at the Boone County Courthouse, where she once worked as a clerk. The proposed monument will honor her as a whistleblower who gave her life in pursuit of truth and justice. The journal that she buried while fleeing her pursuers has been carefully preserved and digitized, ensuring that her words and witness will never again be lost or silenced. In her final entry, written as she feared for her life, she expressed a hope that seems prophetic now. "If I do not survive to tell this story, I pray that someone else will find it and continue what I have begun. The truth of Willow Creek must be told, no matter how long it takes, no matter how powerful those who wish it buried. Future generations deserve to know what happened here, not just for the sake of those who suffered, but for their own protection against such evils rising again." 170 years later, Catherine's prayer has been answered. The truth she fought to reveal has finally come to light, though the full reckoning with its implications has only just begun. The story of Judge Blackwood's marriage lots stands as a testament to both the depths of human cruelty and the persistence of those who refuse to let such atrocities remain hidden. As night falls over the rolling hills of Kentucky, the beautifully restored Willow Creek Plantation stands silent, its future uncertain. Tours have been permanently suspended, and discussions continue about whether the site should be preserved as a memorial to those who suffered there or repurposed for more healing uses. Local residents report that the atmosphere around the plantation has changed since the excavation of the archive. Some claim to hear voices on the grounds at night, not cries of anguish, but what sounds like quiet conversation, as though long-silenced victims are finally able to tell their stories. Whether or not one believes in such supernatural manifestations, it seems fitting that a place once defined by enforced silence now resonates with voices. The truth of what happened at Willow Creek and beyond can never again be buried or erased. As we continue to uncover and process this history, we must ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. How many other stories like this remain hidden? How many other systems of exploitation have simply evolved rather than ended? And most importantly, how do we ensure that such atrocities never happen again? These questions have no easy answers, but acknowledging the full truth of our history, including its darkest chapters, is a necessary first step. The story of Judge Blackwood's marriage auctions reminds us that evil often hides behind respectability, that atrocities can be committed by those society views as upstanding citizens, and that systems of exploitation rarely vanish completely. They simply adapt to new circumstances. It also reminds us that even the most carefully hidden truths can eventually come to light, that no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against her, One person like Catherine Miller can initiate a process that eventually leads to justice, even if she doesn't live to see it fulfilled. As you reflect on this disturbing chapter of American history, remember that the past is never truly past. Its effects continue to shape our present in ways both obvious and subtle. The systems and mentalities that allowed Judge Blackwood's atrocities to occur and remain hidden for so long have not disappeared entirely from our world. But remember also that if Catherine Miller could stand against such evil with nothing but her conscience and determination in 1855, we have no excuse not to continue her work today. The pursuit of truth and justice remains as vital now as it was then. In the words of Dr. Eliza Johnson, whose research helped bring this story to light, we can't change what happened at Willow Creek. We can't undo the suffering of those who were victimized by Blackwood's system. But we can honor them by acknowledging their reality, by refusing to look away from uncomfortable truths, and by committing ourselves to creating a world where such atrocities are truly impossible. As darkness settles over Kentucky, let us carry forward the light that Catherine Miller first kindled, the light of truth that no power, no matter how great, can permanently extinguish. Turn to God and Jesus Christ in these troubling times, for only through divine guidance can we find the strength to confront the darkest chapters of our history and work toward healing and reconciliation. In the face of such profound evil, faith offers hope that justice, though long delayed, will ultimately prevail.